Hello and welcome to It Had to Be Said. Now I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And what I have on the left is a Fox News article, and on the right a PDF obtained on an image board from a Nazi. And what this exercise is going to do is show how extreme right-wing ideas and beliefs become mainstreamed, and how this is inherently different than what happens on the left, in which you have establishment Democrats, for instance, funding and fighting against even progressives who run for office in Congress and on the state level. On the right, this is different, and I've spoken to this on the previous two podcast episodes from the It Had to Be Said podcast on the Red Pill 1 and 2, and the Red Pill is just the name of this document that was obtained by someone from a white nationalist, far-right Nazi sympathizer. After reading the Fox News article, there's always been a fairly direct line between the extreme right and mainstream right. However, this is one of the more direct lines, and I've said this often. However, I do feel like some people might dismiss it. And so I want to analyze this article and then analyze the PDF and then kind of bring the two together, because this is just undeniable. It's undeniable. But first, let's look at the Fox News article. So I'm going to go ahead and make this larger here. Okay. So Laura Ingraham, left's indoctrination tactics have parental rights, Judeo-Christian values under siege. So here we already have a conspiracy. So we have this monolithic left, right? Because it's just the left. And then we have indoctrination. And so right off the bat, that use of language is going to totalitarian regimes. And with the right, it always goes to communism. And we'll see when we look at the PDF, it goes to communism because communism is directly linked to Judaism. And these conspiracies all come from anti-Semitism. So below this, it says the Ingraham Angle host was reacting after a teachers union leader vowed to defend members in the critical race theory fight. I mean, first of all, this is not accurate. We'll see what the union leader actually said, which is that they support the teaching of honest history, real history, not just propaganda and nationalism. And critical race theory is not taught in K-12. It's a field of study that is in advanced legal degree programs. So it's a false statement right off the bat. However, it does bring in this idea of race. So already we have an idea that Christianity is being attacked, and the way that's being attacked is via discussion of race. So these are important things from the right, because critical race theory, of course, studies how marginalized communities have been affected and treated through generations, whether that's from a legal perspective, a socioeconomic perspective, a political perspective, etc. And the way that this article, and this is a mainstream Fox News article, is framing it, is that it's actually Christians that are under attack. And what's the opposite of a minority population in the United States? Well, that would be a Caucasian population, right? So white Christians are under attack by the left, and this is the conspiracy, right? This is the conspiracy. There's more. So Ingram, and you can see this here under that picture. We see a concerted effort to indoctrinate our children into a dark mindset of anti-Americanism, and this is also important. So now we have three prongs to this conspiracy, right? One is an attack on Christianity. Another is the idea of race, being in the study of race, racism being involved in this, and that when you combine these things, right, an attack on religion, i.e. Christianity, as well as investigating, discussing racism in American history, that it leads to a mindset of anti-Americanism. And so this is very important. I almost don't need to go on any further. But let's just go through the article and I'll kind of sum that up again. But that's the main thrust of this. Going down further, again, the left wants to take the parents out of this for their twisted agenda. So there's a coherent left, a conspiracy, right? It's many people that are working towards something in the backgrounds who have an agenda. Here, Ingram was reacting to the nation's second largest teachers union, who vowed to defend members in the critical race theory fight, citing the union's support to teach honest history. So I don't know. I don't see anything in that quote saying that they support teachers in K-12 ability to teach critical history. I just see, or critical race theory, I just see honest history. And when you get into this topic, and this is a little bit outside the realm of this discussion, what you see is really anything that could be seen as being negative in American history is just lumped into critical race theory. And I suppose the opposite of that would just be pure, fluff propaganda, nationalistic lies. I don't really know what the alternative is to the material reality of the past. But anyway, so there's nothing in this quote from the teachers union. They even talked about critical race theory. And this is important too, because it's interjecting lies, right? And so if somebody reads this and they believe this, you're going to be having two different conversations. Someone who's informed on the topic would be coming from a place in which they're claiming that this isn't even in the curriculum. And their idea of what critical race theory is actually what it is, and that is a more advanced field of study in legal degrees in the university level. Whereas someone who might not know that, looking at this, is going to think that this is some misinterpretation of history in a conspiracy from the left, right? A totalitarian type of indoctrinating regime that's using isms like racism to undermine Christianity and parental rights. I'm going to click read some more here, because at the bottom there's something that I want to get to. This then jumps over to vaccines, which this type of jumping around is common in conspiracies, but it's important that we look at this as a conspiracy, because that's a key component to the core ideas and beliefs from the right. I mean, first you have to accept that conspiracies exist to move any further down this rabbit hole. So we have some vaccine things here. This talks about some legislation happening involving vaccinations. So this was also something I wanted to touch on here as well. This section that's thrown in, again, it's out of nowhere, it's not connected, and that's how conspiracies are created. But here it talks about one of New York's fanciest schools said Ingram teaches first graders about masturbation. And if this were actually true in the context in which this is being presented, I mean, this would be borderline pedophilia. And in the next paragraph, it says that these educrats, whatever this means, I think she's trying to combine the term Democrat with educator, which is interesting, because now we're saying that, corporate mainstream Democrats, people that get funding from Goldman Sachs and things like that these people are part of this left radical agenda conspiracy, that they relish pushing a sexual envelope. And this is very important too, because one of the first pills, one of the first things that gets into, and this was in the Red Pill 1 podcast from the It Had to Be Said podcast, one of the first pills that you get and when I say pill, what I mean is hard truth, something that you don't want to accept. From the right is that there is the existence of these pedophilia rings, and this goes back to Comet Pizza and all the conspiracies that came out during the 2016 presidential election, 2015-16 primaries, and general election, which are all untrue, of course. But this is kind of what spawned QAnon as well, and Save the Children. And this is very important because we'll see that this is one of the first things that's discussed in the PDF. So now we have what I'm going to say is, you know, at least inappropriate sexual discussions with minors, but you know, perhaps even borderline with pedophilia involved in this conspiracy as well. And then this is also very important too. And then this is the end of the article. Then she quoted Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, who once declared, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." So in the beginning, when we talked about totalitarian regimes, now we know specifically the type of regime that this article is focusing on, and that regime is communism, or at least Soviet communism. Okay, so let's just kind of reiterate some things here. We'll go back to the top. So we have this monolithic thing on the left, right? This conspiracy of players and actors that are seeking to undermine Christian values. And so, you know, right here, right, Christian values. And how are they doing this? Critical race theory, right? So racism, right? Discussions of racism in American history. What does this lead to? It leads to anti-Americanism, right? And so I would think anti-Americanism would be like a demoralization of patriotism, of nationalism. Here we have the left's twisted agenda. So again, there's an agenda. It's this type of conspiracy thought, right? Here, this is very important because if someone were to read this article and then speak to someone who might actually be an educator, or someone who might even teach a critical race theory class, you're going to have two people discussing two separate realities, and so they won't even be able to agree on objective truth, right? Objective fact. And then we get down into some more conspiracies with vaccines, etc. Here we have the inappropriate discussion of sexual acts with minors. One step away, I think, from pedophilia. We could, I think, safely say. Here we have more totalitarian, right? And then lastly, a quote from Lenin, who was from the Bolshevik Party, part of the Russian Revolution that led to the Soviet Union and that form of communism in the world. Okay, so now again, this is just from Fox News, right? Just and it's an article about a show. So this isn't just on the website. It's also from a cable news show, right? That gets many viewers. Very popular show. Okay. Now let's get to this article. I want to be careful about what I show because I don't want to inadvertently advertise this propaganda. But this PDF you can see on the tab near the top. It's called The Red Pill, and so this was obtained by somebody from a website, not a mainstream website, from a person that was described themselves as a Nazi white nationalist. And so this document is supposed to give you insight into why these radical beliefs are true. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. We have some links above, and we're not going to watch the videos, but those links go to a KGB propagandist, right? Whose name is Yuri Benzimov. And this person is real. That's not a conspiracy. He was a defector from the Soviet Union. And I go over him in the last podcast, the Red Pill 2. But for those of you that haven't listened to that and aren't interested in listening to that, Yuri had some interesting insight into how the KGB worked. And he proposed that there was a 4-step process that the KGB used to deteriorate enemy civilizations from within. So a war, but not a war with weapons, a war of hearts and minds, we could say. And one of the main ways in which this occurs, we can see here. And some of this is not Yuri, some of it is the unnamed author interjecting their opinion. But we can see here, an ideological subversion is the replacement of basic moral principles of society. And so we're talking about Western society, we're talking about the United States specifically, we're talking about Christianity. And so what this document, again, from a, what I think people consider a far-right extremist point of view, is saying, look, this is why the left is doing this. This is why you have to accept the red pill of white nationalism, Nazism, other far-right extremist beliefs. That the left is trying, just like the KGB, right? Just like the Soviet Union, and that was in the article we saw with Laura Ingraham. She even quoted Lenin, that there's an ideological subversion to replace the basic moral principles of society. And so that's how this gets started, right? According to Yuri, who did work for the KGB. And so that was the title of the article, that the left, in quotes, was attacking Christianity, right? So this is part of the conspiracy theory that the far right holds. Ideological subversion is the replacement of the basic moral principles of society. And so how does that happen according to this document from a Nazi? Well, here. Rather than say thou shalt not kill, which would be a commandment, right? That would be a Christian belief. Thou shalt not steal, etc. Society begins to operate on other codes. For example, thou shalt not be racist. Thou shalt not be sexist. Thou shalt not be classist. Isms, racism, right? And so this is important because one of the premise for the article that we just looked at is the idea that critical race theory is the method in which the left is gaining entrance into public schools, I suppose, to indoctrinate children. And part of that, the purpose of that indoctrination is to attack Christianity. And so right here, we say we're in this conspiracy from a Nazi. The commandments essentially are being replaced by these other things, these isms, specifically racism. And this is important because it then goes on to say, dictionaries can be edited, meaning that a commandment, right, a Christian commandment from the 10 Commandments is divine, whereas words that are made by humans in this definition can be changed. And this is the whole idea from the right behind the concept of critical race theory being used to indoctrinate children. It's the idea that words, right, racism, and narratives from the past are being changed to demonize white Christian Americans and to make them look bad, essentially. And ultimately, in the Laura Ingraham article we saw, what that leads to is anti-Americanism, right? Or a feeling of being un-American, which would be the goal, according to this PDF from a Nazi, that the KGB, right, or the former Soviet Union would use, right? That would be a goal in order to deteriorate a society from within and weaken it. And so again, we have that link to a conspiracy with communism, Lenin, KGB. This is the same thing, is what I'm getting at. So there's more. Let's go. Here, this states that religion, as mentioned, is one of the most important institutions to abolish. And again, that was the headline for the Laura Ingraham article. It is obvious that by controlling the keys to morality in society, the system is placing itself into a position of God. And so, again, removing Christianity, right? This is part of the conspiracy, the introduction of critical race theory into K-12 schools to attack white Christian history, people, to demoralize white Christian children, to make them feel guilty and horrible about themselves, and ultimately manifest in anti-Americanism, which according to Urey would be a goal of the KGB, which Laura Ingraham supported in a roundabout way by ending her little monologue by quoting Vladimir Lenin. So let's go a little bit further, because I think we understand that part, right? So while I'm looking for this second piece that we want to get to, already, right? Already, these are one and the same. But it's going to get much more specific. This article, you can already see, begins calling out specific things like Black Lives Matter, right? Critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, already being connected down here. Black Lives Matter then gets connected to Antifa and then to the DNC, or the Democratic National Committee. We see Clinton's, Obama's, Biden, Pelosi down here. Let's highlight them. And so this is the left, right? This is the left that Laura Ingraham was talking about. And again, this is not from Fox News. This is from a Nazi. So let's go a little bit further here. So far, we haven't even really gotten to the red pill yet, right? This is essentially the article that we just saw on Fox News. I mean, there's no difference here. So let's get to points where the differences might actually happen. Here it is. This article goes off on some other conspiracies, just like the Laura Ingraham article did about vaccinations and pedophilia. This one goes off on stock markets and the fiat system, more Ron Paul type things. However, it should be noted that this PDF begins, and the Red Pill Part 1 from the It Had to Be Said podcast goes over this. It introduces the reader to all these topics by talking about Jeffrey Epstein and pedophilia rings. So that's in this as well. It's another similarity. But this is where the two begin to not separate, but to where we start to see the behind the scenes from the Fox News article. So if you dig deeper into these concepts, where do they go? So the amount of power these people have over our economy and minds cannot be a mistake. People like the Rothschilds, the Epsteins of the world, there's Epstein again, Weinstein, George Soros. So first of all, what do all those people have in common? They're all Jewish names. And then there's this claim that these people are sponsoring groups like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just one step further on the same spectrum, not a different argument or a different road. This is just one step further than the Fox News article, right? The Fox News article said the left. They just didn't define the left. Well, they did a little bit because they talked about communism, but they didn't say specific names. This article is, right? But I think we could find articles on Fox News about Black Lives Matter and Antifa be connected to the quote unquote left as well. And we saw earlier in this article, the DNC was called out with specific names, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, etc. I think that the step further this PDF takes is that we have the introduction of people like the Rothschilds, Epsteins, Weinsteins, and Soros. And again, we'll see that these specific people are introduced because they're Jewish. And ultimately, the conspiracy that Fox News is pushing, that white Christian children are under attack by this communist left using critical race theory to demoralize them into being anti-American, that ultimately this goes all the way down a rabbit hole, ending in anti-Semitism. And that it's not different, it's the same. It's just that the PDF goes a little bit deeper than the Fox News article does. So let's get to some of this anti-Semitism here. Okay. So it begins here, right? It begins here. We see the communism. So communism, again, Laura Ingraham pointed this out, is some form of Satan worship. So, Satan worship, pedophilia, this is QAnon, right? QAnon is just rehashed anti-Semitism. That leaders wish to put themselves into a position of God. So this would be, again, people trying to replace Judeo-Christian values. And in the Laura Ingraham article, that's coming from a point of view of parental rights, right? To cultural or critical race theory using racism, isms, right? So therefore, the God is replaced with these, what did they call them? Educrats, I believe, a combination of educators and Democrats. Well, that's what this is, right? That's what this is. And so according to this PDF, educrats are the same as global communist conspiracists. And here's where the pill kind of begins. So to this point, you might be able to think of somebody in your family, somebody who's just very conservative, very Christian, looking at that Fox News article and saying, yes, I agree with this. And then, you trying to explain to them, well, this is coming from a place of anti-Semitism. And then they, saying something like, how could you claim that? Even the headline says Judeo-Christianity, right? How could you claim that? Well, here we go. From the PDF that originated from the far right, we don't know who all these shadowy Epstein, Weinstein figures are, but they're the left, right? And we never will. The most important task, however, is to figure out who this group is and not just what they are doing or how they're doing it. If we can begin to unmask them, their power fails. This is where it gets very real. Epstein, Weinstein, Rothschild, Soros, these nameless stockholders, the communists. So now all these people with Jewish names are communists. What do they all have in common? What is the link? The book of Revelations in the Bible speaks of the synagogue of Satan. And so here we go. And this is the anti-Semitism. And this is the connection, right? The Rothschilds are Jewish, Soros is Jewish, so et cetera, right? We don't need to go. So this is important because this is where the ideas that are being presented on Fox News come from. And I'm sure that, Laura Ingraham would deny all of this and say that this is ridiculous and et cetera, et cetera. And honestly, there might be people involved with this and the show production, et cetera, that don't know this. And I'm fairly certain that most people viewing this don't understand this. But it is important to understand that the idea that there is a conspiracy and that conspiracy involves communists, and that communists are this kind of ambiguous block of the left that also includes mainstream corporate Democrats, right? That these people are in conspiracy to remove Christianity from America, right, or attack it. Which, you know, here we saw Yuri, the former KGB person that defected, you know, claim that that's what you do. That's one of the main things that the KGB would do to demoralize a country. That this idea, this concept, right, leading to anti-Americanism or demoralization, that Yuri would say, that all these things, when you get down to it, when you get down to, well, you know, okay, who's doing this? Who is the left? Who are these communists? Well, this is where Fox News just kind of puts a period on that sentence and doesn't continue. And that's the anti-Semitism, right? The Rothschilds, George Soros, Epstein, Weinstein, et cetera, and that would be the red pill. That would be the truth, according to the far right. Of course, not the truth at all. This goes on to talk about a whole bunch of anti-Semitic tropes that I'm not going to publicize. But just know that this section talks about anti-Semitism, how Jewish people have, you know, kind of larger representation in media, how they control a lot of global corporations, banking institutions, and that this is often code for when people say things like New World Order, for instance, or globalist, or elites. All these terms go back to this idea of a conspiracy. And when you go far enough back into that conspiracy from a Western Christian point of view, it always ultimately ends with anti-Semitism. And here it continues with Satan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, I think we can kind of wrap this up here. I'm not going to read all this because it's total horrible nonsense. But we have Seth Rich brought up here, and I did see another name here, Isaac Cappy, right? That's important. And these are important because these people, well, Isaac Cappy, for instance, was a QAnon believer, Trump person, who said many people were pedophiles with no evidence, of course, who ultimately committed suicide, and that that suicide is also wrapped up in a larger conspiracy too. But this brings in that little piece from the Laura Ingraham video as well. Okay, and then it goes into the next section, which we won't cover here. So let's go back up to the top. And we'll kind of wrap this up with a side by side here. Okay. So there's Unmasking the Serpent. And here's the Fox News article, right? Just to hammer this home, I'm going to quickly, we just went over this PDF that ultimately gets to anti-Semitism, and a conspiracy that by removing Christianity from American culture, that we have this communist revolution, coming, and who are these people? Well, they're all Jewish, right? And again, I don't want to show too much of this PDF because it is vile and just hate-filled nonsense. But there is, there is another connection, I'll say, between Bolshevik Judaism, which is a conspiracy in which the Bolshevik Party in the Russian Revolution was tied to Judaism. And this was something that Hitler used after the Reichstag fire decree, well, before the Reichstag fire decree, to condemn communists in Germany and the Weimar Republic before he even had power, but also after the Reichstag fire decree to usurp power with extra presidential powers that essentially create a one-party state, right? But the argument was made from a nationalistic point of view to protect ethnic German people from this outside influence of communists and Jewish people. So over here on the Fox News, again, the left indoctrination tactics have parental rights and Judeo-Christian values under siege. There's the Christian values section. We have critical race theory. And so Yuri, the former KGB person that's in this PDF, that's how that would fit in by talking about racism and using isms as a new moral code to replace those Christian values in order to destabilize a country. Here we see a concerted effort to indoctrinate our children into a dark mindset of anti-Americanism. That would be that four-step process that the Nazi PDF discusses, claiming that by doing this, by introducing discussion of racism into public schools and removing religion, that ultimately the goal would be to demoralize and destabilize the country. This would be a communist goal, again, the Jewish Bolshevik communism. In the Fox News article, this is anti-Americanism, right? But it's the same thing they're talking about. Forces are working overtime to undermine parental rights and their Judeo-Christian values. Okay, so there it is again. How is this happening? Critical race theory. And this is interesting too, because this is not in the PDF, but one of the in separate lectures that Yuri gave, one of the key points that he discussed was to present people with conflicting information as well, a KGB tactic, so that no one can agree on objective reality. And so this would be a great example of that as well in this paragraph, because people, again, that know what critical race theory is, could be talking to someone who watched or read this article, and they would be discussing two totally separate things, right? So they're not agreeing on the premise for discussion, which is actually a tactic that Yuri described. And then here we have some conspiracies going off about, vaccinations, the nuclear family. Also, we didn't touch on that before. And this is the same in the PDF that we saw, where it gets into some other things like the fiat system, the stock market, et cetera, but they're all conspiracies. And it's important just to know that they both share, right, this idea that conspiracies are a valid topic to discuss. In the Fox News, I want to get to the part here. So here we have that discussion of, first graders talking about masturbation. And in the PDF, there is a whole chapter on pedophilia and Jeffrey Epstein and how that's tied to Satanism and global conspiracies with Democrats. However, even in the section that we looked at, we saw that it ended with some names of people who had discussed these things, more connected to QAnon, but it's all the same thing. And ultimately, again, all leads back to anti-Semitism. And then lastly here, right, the quote from Lenin, which is exactly what this PDF is saying on the right, that this is a communist plot, and that ultimately, when you dig down deep enough into this communist plot, you see a lot of Jewish names, because communism, via people like Hitler and many other fascists, Franco in Spain, et cetera, made these connections too. That when you're saying communism, really what you're getting at is Jewish Bolshevikism. And it's very telling, I think, in the Fox News article here, that they didn't just say, Laura Ingraham didn't just say communism that specifically Vladimir Lenin was called out, because there's all kinds of communism. I mean, what are we talking about? Are we talking about Castro in Cuba? Are we talking about Mao? Are we talking about China? But no, we're specifically talking about Vladimir Lenin, and Vladimir Lenin specifically led the Bolshevik Party, again, connected to Judaism. So I think that this is just a great dissecting of how these far right, these extremist views, right? I think we would agree that the idea that white Christian Americans are being brainwashed by Jewish communists in order to replace moral values with isms to make themselves leaders and ultimately, I guess, enslave the population. I don't know, take away rights, create a totalitarian society. I would think that is, I don't know, a conspiracy, a little bit out there, definitely some racism and anti-Semitism occurring. But again, just showing the red pill example, kind of the behind the scenes for the true believers, where this stuff actually comes from, that says the part that you're supposed to keep silent, versus the public facing version, and just how dangerous the public facing version is, and just how brainwashing it truly is. This is hate speech. This is far right extremism being dressed up as a talk show and being presented as if there is some genuine concern for children. This is just good old anti-Semitic far right fascism.